Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Gnostic Media UnSpun podcast, episode number 106. Excited to be here tonight. We have a great show lined up. Before we get started, I wanted to mention all of the donations and support we got over the last week, from everybody here, just doing some settings here. As well as I really wanted to give special thanks to all of the trolls and counterintelligence agents and all of y'all that attacked us with your fake hit pieces and everything, exposing yourselves over the last few weeks. That was really good. You know, they say you get the most flack when you're over the target, so I appreciate all the flack, and you guys did a really good job. We didn't even expect some of you that came out doing hit pieces to do that, and trying to cover up 300 years of shit research. I can understand why you got to do that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like you're part of the lie. You gotta play along with what they want and all of this stuff. So you got to pretend like Holly and I are cousins, or you have to pretend that the wonderful images that Chris does for my website show that I'm somehow dirty, or that, who was it that donated the microphone a couple of months ago? Thanks for that. That because, we have decent microphones, that makes us dirty. Like you can't go to a Guitar Center and buy a microphone. So, that we're Satanists, all of this kind of stuff. I mean, it's just like, when you get in and you start realizing what they're really hiding, you can realize why the attacks that we got a few weeks ago were just so over the top. And I mean, I haven't had attacks like that since the freaking Pizzagate stuff. So good on y'all for, again, for letting us know when we're getting on the right topic there. And I really appreciate that. So, let's see here. So, Holly, welcome back to the show. I mean, we've got a great show tonight.
Yeah, we've been working hard on this topic, the Salem Witch Trials and its connections to Harvard and the Royal Society, and found a bunch of new info. And yeah, I wasn't exactly expecting the amount of trolls that came out after our episode. I thought maybe a little bit. I also got a ton more subs on my channel. I'm up to 7,000 subscribers, so I got like 2,000 more subscribers since that episode just a couple weeks ago. So that's good. It's tempered with some hate that I wasn't expecting, but I was also under the assumption that I'm like, Salem's a safe topic. It's more than 300 years ago now.
You don't even think that people would flip out over something that old, but it's like, wow.
I'm like, all these people are long, long dead. So I felt safe, because my work originally was based off of your spies in academic clothing. And a lot of those people are still alive or know of those people. And I just thought we would be safe, talking about the Salem Witch Trials. But it seemed that even questioning the official narrative that they have no explanation for it is dangerous for some reason.
Well, and we did actually discover why it's dangerous as well. And again, we have to really thank them for bringing so much attention. When you're just over the target and you're getting close, and all of a sudden they're just constantly attacking you. It's like, there it is. Thanks. So, we're going to go into a lot of that tonight. We have a lot of new research, a lot of new discoveries. So Holly and I, we, after the show or before the show, we had started working on an article, and then that has, over the last few weeks, turned into a book project. And Holly and I have been doing a lot of research, so we really appreciate all of the support and the donations and everything that everybody gives for both of us. We've both had to buy a bunch of books and start digging in and doing a lot of research on all of this. So anyway, please do support and donate. And so we're going to, there's a tremendous amount of new research and new supportive material that we've discovered. So, what I want to get into first is, a lot of people from the last episode, they were questioning this idea of the Puritans being Jewish and whatnot, and we've done a lot of research into that sense. And you know what? And I had a book, and I think I left it upstairs on accident. Sorry, I meant to show it. But let's see, I'll pull the title up on Amazon so I at least know what the heck it is since I just ordered it. But these books show that one is Reckless Rights, Purim and the Legacy of Jewish Violence, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and the Ancient to Modern World. And then another one is New Israel and New England, Jews and Puritans in Early America. And we found some real nuggets in these books. But basically what we discovered is that, for centuries there has been this lie that the name Puritan comes from purification. And we discovered that the name Puritan actually comes from the name Purim. And the Purim is a festival that I presume it's held every year. What is it, the 4th of, I don't know, I don't remember the Hebrew months and all that. But let's see. So, it's this celebration of the Jewish victory over the Persians under the leadership of Haman, and the official history is that Haman was going to genocide the Jews, but right at the last second, the Jews genocided 75,000 Persians instead, and right at the last second thwarted the efforts of the Persians. And so this is what this celebration, the Purim, is about. And so the Puritan comes from this Purim. And we see the Purim that comes from Haman was leading the Amalekites. And we see throughout, here's this citation, Oxford and all of these citations that we found spin this. But let's see. So explained in Esther 3:7-24, the Jewish festival observed on the 14th and 15th of the month of Adar in commemoration of the defeat of Haman's plot to massacre the Jews. See Esther 9. And so, all of this stuff plays into the history of what becomes the Massachusetts Bay Colony and Salem towns, these places and what took place there, because it's not the official history. And, we're not told that originally it was the, what do they call it? Let me pull that up here. It was the, what do they call it, Holly? Geez, now I've forgotten the term. So they even had, for the Massachusetts colony, what they originally called it. So Cotton Mather's grandfather, he names this town originally, or this whole thing. So Cotton Mather's father originally came up with the Massachusetts, the Republic for Massachusetts, and it was the Hebrew Republic of Massachusetts, which was laid out in 1641. And, so again, these are part of this official history. Do you want to go into some of this as well, Holly?
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to describe here is that the Puritans wanted to enact a new Purim, a new genocide. So they genocided the Amalekites, which you said are the Persians, and 75,000 people celebrated, women and children, complete eradication of the Amalekites celebrated. And then the Puritans, with their new covenant to the land mass of North America, were able to move forward using the corporation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to get the funding going so that they could create a new genocide, a new Purim in the colony of Massachusetts, which led to the annihilation and genocide of the Pequot, Pequot Native Americans in Massachusetts. It was part of a ritual, basically. I mean, they completely annihilated the Pequots, and the smallpox plague broke out there. They murdered women and children, just completely destroyed the culture over there. And that was part of their plan, was to wipe out the area. They thought that they had divine right to North America with the Mayflower Compact, which was a new covenant for them. So it was basically their new Israel.
And then the Purim, with the beliefs with the Purim, they believed it was a holy war for them to exterminate the Amalekites. Now, and then where did we find it? In Numbers, we found that there was a, oh geez, what was the citation? So we found in the Bible in Numbers that the official belief is that the Amalekites and the Canaanites eventually come together and annihilate the Purim for, or whomever, the Zionists, for doing all of this and for all of these atrocities. But all of this has been covered up. Now, something that you just mentioned that was very important was the smallpox. Now, we've found evidence after evidence, and sorry, I'm just looking up some of these, citations here. So, Numbers 14:43, the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and ye shall fall by the sword, because ye were turned away from the Lord. Therefore the Lord will not be with you. But they presumed to go up unto the hilltop. Nevertheless, the ark of the covenant of the Lord and Moses departed not out of the camp. So, and this whole thing is basically showing that the Jews had violated the covenants of God, and that, so basically what it appears is that they were trying to kill off the groups that they thought were the Amalekites before they would unite with the Canaanites and take them out, as Numbers discusses. So that's oddly what this really seems to be about. And so they were doing, we've discovered that there was a lot of human experimentation going on. Why don't I pass that over to you for a minute, Holly?
Okay, so we started to look up just the history of plagues during that time, and we had found information about several diseases, plagues that had wiped out the native tribes, first starting with the Jesuits, the wiping out the Native Americans in Canada. And the Native American people said that they were bringing the disease with them, and we have evidence that during the French and Indian War.
Do you want to read a couple of those quotes about that?
Yes. So.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but there's some good ones.
So we have the Jesuits in Canada. This is from 1625. The Jesuits in Canada observed with some sort of reason that since our arrival in these lands, those that had been nearest to us had happened to be most ruined by smallpox, and that whole villages of those who had received us now appeared utterly exterminated. So the Mayflower brought over the smallpox plague as well, and the Native Americans, they called it the Indian plague at one point, wiping out parts of the Iroquois. The smallpox desolates them to such a degree that they think no longer of meeting nor of wars, but only of bewailing the dead, of whom there is already an immense number. So there's a lot of evidence of the use of smallpox being used during the French and Indian War. There are quotes about the military giving the smallpox blankets to the Native Americans and saying, I hope this works. And that's pretty common knowledge. You know, most people know about the idea of the smallpox blankets going out, but you can start to extrapolate that to the whole North American continent.
And what most people don't realize is that, and we'll be discussing this, but the whole practice of of exterminating large populations with smallpox goes back to at least the early 1600s. But we have been discovering some interesting evidence that suggests that the Black Plague of Europe that wiped out 30 to 60% of the European population was another attack by. It was before the Royal Society was founded, so it wasn't. We can't say it was the Royal Society specifically, but it was a lot of the same group of people, associated people, the same nexus of, associated things going on. And so it looks like what they were actually doing was going around all of the northern hemisphere and killing Tartars all over the place. And that's an interesting thing that's, is starting to bubble up all over the place everywhere we look with that. And when you look at, the northern hemisphere and this whole Tartary situation, it really changes what we've been seeing. Now that we had a quote where they were going to, if I can remember where it was, where they wanted to kill off the Native Americans, etc. Where was that at? Jeez.
So far our paper is up to 80 pages, so
sorry folks.
We got a lot of notes to go through here.
Yeah, so anyway, hold on, I'm just okay, so smallpox represented the most effective way of purposefully used biological weapon of Occidental war and colonial history, introduced in the American continent by European colonizers. Now, this isn't actually true. This is a false statement. They make a blanket statement to blame all Europeans. It was a very specific group that was tied to this. They were almost always Puritans, almost always Old Testament believers, and and they weren't just like normal pilgrim settlers. There were specific groups. They were tied to the Royal Society, they were tied to Harvard, etc., that were associated with this. But it was explicitly used several times as a way to infect Native Americans during the so-called conquest of the West. And hold on. So I'm just looking for some more of these. So, this whole thing was considered like a new Jerusalem, and the Puritans were the new Israelites, and they were recreating the massacre of the Amalekites as a ritual and repeating it, and they've repeated it a number of times throughout history. We're starting to realize, like, it looks like the Black Plague of Europe was a repeat. It looks like the Great Plague and Fire of London was a repeat of this. It looks like, the massacres in Massachusetts, the massacres of the Native Americans across the continent are all a part of this same Purim ritual.
So we started to see it's not just smallpox. So, during this time of the Salem Witch Trials, just to tie it back to this time period a little bit, there were smallpox plagues going around. There were measles plagues going around. The bubonic plague wasn't that far off. The last bubonic plague, called the Great Plague in England, was 1665 to 1666. So it's during this time period as well. And then as we started to look into the connections to the bubonic plague and witchcraft and the Great Fire of England, guess what? It connects to the Royal Society members again, and the very same people who also ran the Salem Witch Trials in Massachusetts.
Yeah, so you have, and the same people who are coming up with the research and studies for all of this are the same people who actually rebuilt London and were a part of the whole London Fire and London Plague epidemic. And then they come over and they repeat it, and they're part of the Lennon Society. So anyway, I want to get into some other key elements here too. I'm just bringing up some notes here. Sorry, we've got so many notes. It's a bit spread out. So now, an interesting thing that I discovered was in research of the name the Mayflower itself. And Now, you might be able to pronounce this better than I can, Holly, because you speak French. But so the name Mayflower, they say isn't related to May Day, which was the communist and socialist International Workers' Day thing, May 1st. And they claim it's not related to M'aider, which means help me in French. And that's the official claim. Well, this guy, he was a pilot in England, and he was asked if what the international emergency call should be. And he just, immediately came up with Mayday. And, and when you think, and then they came up with this whole BS nonsense that it's related to M'aider, which is help me in French. And so this whole nonsense story, when you think about it, the excuse is that, well, then everybody would know it was actually help me because everybody knows that that's what it sounds like in French, even though I never knew that. So when you realize that May Day is associated to communism and socialism, and it's the International Workers' Day, and then you realize now, so there's another interesting fact about Massachusetts, is it was originally the Massachusetts Commonwealth. Now, a Commonwealth is another name for communism. And so the Massachusetts Bay Colony turns into this big communist fiasco. And the Governor William Bradford of Massachusetts, he was the governor in the 1600s when it was a socialist system, he comes out and he says it's just nonsense. The experience that was had in the common course and condition tried sundry years, that amongst godly and sober men may well evince the vanity that conceit of Plato's and other ancients applaud, and some by later times, that the taking away of property and bringing in community into the commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing if they were wiser than God. And then he goes on saying, for this community was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard much employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. For young men there, that were almost able to be fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense. The strong had no more in division of victuals and clothes than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter the other could. This was thought injustice. The aged and graver men to be ranked and equalized in labor and everything else thought it was some indignity and disrespect unto them, and for men's wives to be commanded to do service for other men, as dress their meat, washing their clothes, etc., they deemed it a kind of slavery, neither could many husbands well brook it. And so, that is, I need to get the original citation there, but that's from William Bradford, the original governor of Massachusetts. So, you look at this stuff, and I exposed this in Manufacturing the Deadhead several years ago, this whole thing with the countercultural movement being tied to communism and all of this stuff, and we see this this whole same nonsense happening here. But what's ironic is that these people have been repeating this stuff for 400 years. They did it to the Soviet Union, they did it to China, they did it in Massachusetts. It's failed everywhere. And they're still trying to implement this Marxist crap, and people actually still buy into it, and it fails every time over and over. And thank you, Polygonal Construction, for the $4.99 donation. I really appreciate that. But so this whole thing keeps repeating with these themes in communism. Now, going back to the Mayflower name, Mayflower, now on May Day, flowers were given out, and it, interestingly, and the whole thing of Salem and Mayflower and all of this is really, they've kind of put it in everybody's face to kind of mock everyone. So when you get that Mayflower is connected to May Day, and if you do some minutes of research, and of course there'll be some half-ass efforts to cover it up, and some academic will write some piece, oh, it's not really related to this, it's Madier and all of this stuff. But you go in and you look at it, you see it's connected to communism and socialism, you dig a little bit further, and now, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to see that it's connected to St. Walpurgis and Walpurgisnacht and Beltane, which is the witches' Sabbath. So Mayflower tied to May Day, which is the witches' Sabbath, or Beltane, the eve of that's Walpurgisnacht, and so that is the day before May Day, or the eve before May Day. And so it's tied to all of this witchcraft. So, again, they've thrown it right in front of our faces for 326 years and then mocked us for it.
So I want to tie that back to, you said it's this is somehow, related to communism. And some people might be like, well, how does this all tie in? So if we go back to Oliver Cromwell, he founded the Republic, the Commonwealth of England, created that model of the Commonwealth, overthrew Charles I. During this time period, there was the English Civil War. The Puritans were really taking power in England during that time, and it really spearheaded with Oliver Cromwell creating the Commonwealth of England from 1649 to 1660. And this Commonwealth model as a republic to overthrow the monarchy influenced the French Revolution, the First French Republic, the American Revolution, and yes, the Founding Fathers all get tied into this. And the philosopher John Milton from England at the time wrote Paradise Lost. And it was basically a call to overthrow the ruling monarchy.
King Charles II, the Stuarts, right?
Yep, and put them forward and promote the Commonwealth. And then
how long did the Commonwealth last before it totally collapsed? Wasn't it like 10 years and it totally failed?
It was England
imploded. Yeah.
It was about 11 years that went on, and then
about as long as Massachusetts. Sorry.
Yeah, and then Paradise Lost, of course, was mentioned and referenced by Karl Marx. So that's where the tie-in is. It's the idea of the Commonwealth, communism, communitarianism are all tied in as similar philosophical thoughts on how to run, to usurp monarchies, and promoted by the Puritans. So the Puritans were the spearhead of the Commonwealth. And then as this was collapsing in 1660, there was the English Civil War. And then by 1665, the Great Plague broke out, the bubonic plague broke out.
And 1666, don't forget, 666, and that's this big ritual that they did when they burned London in a big Holocaust.
Yep, the last Great Plague
right.
was over 100,000 people, a quarter of the population in 18 months. And then the Great Fire of 1666 wiped out most of the city, not some of the important regions, let's just say. But then after the fire, it was rebuilt by King Charles II and Robert Hooke, our good friend Robert Hooke of the Royal Society, and also Christopher Wren, one of the founding members of the Royal Society, promoting a monument, blame the Catholics, and they're able to promote Puritanism and Enlightenment science out of the ashes.
And then what we've also realized was that the promotion of Protestantism was Europe and England for several hundred years because of a number of issues. Kabbalistic sophistry, human sacrifices were cited in a number of places. Their rejection of logos or truth as God was cited, that they were satanic. And their practice of usury was another reason why Judaism had been banned in much of Europe, except for like Holland. And so all of these things played into the creation of Puritanism and the splinter of Christianity. and if you look at it originally from the Tartary perspective, it would be more the Orthodox Church, not the phony, in my opinion, Catholic Church that was created after the collapse of Tartary, but which you can see in some of the layout structure of the Roman Catholic Church. But Tartary's layout was based on natural law, using honor. This is where the codes of honor and integrity and all of this stuff came about, and where we had duels and things like that. Even was these stringent systems of honor and codes of ethics, and you didn't slander people and do things like this. It was you lived in truth and honor, and you strived to always be in that state. So anyway, let's see. So going back to, oh boy, we haven't even gotten to a few of these things. Why don't we hit Benjamin Franklin?
Okay, so part of our larger story with the Salem Witch Trials is, of course, involving, basically, he was the whole foundation of this research. Originally for me was Cotton Mather, the pamphleteer, the propagandist, the medical scientist, the minister from Harvard, a very well-known Puritan who had a lot of control over the area of Salem. He promoted the use of spectral evidence in court so that the witches could be tried in the Salem Witch Trials. And then after his Salem Witch Trials experiment, if you will, in 1721, he launched an inoculation campaign. And it involved medical experiments, biological experiments upon the people of Massachusetts. And this happened several times in the history of Massachusetts. You can see they were calling it ingrafting or inoculation, and basically testing out smallpox vaccines upon the people of Massachusetts. As we discussed in our last episode, there was a riot. People fought against it. And one of the original pamphleteers against the inoculation campaign was the Franklin family. So Ben Franklin and his older brother had a newspaper, a local newspaper, and they started off, you can look up in Wikipedia, they call it yellow journalism. They basically went around, and of course they're Royal Society members, and they were connected to this whole story, saying, blaming Cotton Mather for this event. It's funny, a few decades later, however, Ben Franklin was one of the biggest promoters of inoculation in the colonies. So it seemed like there was some sort of this fake sort of war between Ben Franklin and blaming Cotton Mather, but then bringing back inoculation a few decades later. And as we started to look into the connections of Ben Franklin, Royal Society member, Jan mentioned the Hellfire Club, which I had never heard of.
Well, so what we discover, and by the way, thanks Brian, and thanks Giuseppe for the donations just now. I really appreciate that. So what we discover is this thing going on behind the scenes. So now it appears that now when Benjamin Franklin is 16 years old, he goes over to Harvard or wherever it was at the time to meet Cotton Mather. Now the official story is that Benjamin Franklin is this, he's rabidly against the Puritans, but at 16 he goes to meet Cotton Mather. And, so we have the tie here in the brain, and, it's up on the Harvard website. They like to brag about this stuff, so we can just pull it right up on Harvard's website. I think this might be it. Let's see. Yeah, Benjamin Franklin freely acknowledged his debt to Cotton Mather. So this is this rabid anti-Puritan, and that's Harvard's website right there. You can see. So that he's just bragging about like how tied he is to this Cotton Mather guy. And so Benjamin Franklin, of course, in 1998, it was discovered that he had the remains of 15 bodies in his basement. Now, when you realize that Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Royal Society, inoculations and other types of inoculations, they're doing different types of human experiments, it looks like. So all of this stuff is going on behind the scenes, but it looks like Cotton Mather was actually Benjamin Franklin's handler. Now, another thing that kind of gives up the whole Benjamin Franklin was an anti-Puritan rabid till the end is his mother, Abdiah Folger, was a Puritan. So, and the Puritans are essentially Jewish. Now, during Judaism's outlaw in Europe and all of this Protestant Reformation and all of this, they basically became Puritans. It was basically Judaism with a Christian veneer, and then they could say, well, we're Old Testament Christians. Well, obviously, a Christian is somebody who follows the New Testament. You can't be Old Testament and follow Christ. That doesn't work. It's not. I mean, anybody who's read the Bible knows that the Old Testament is really about the fall, and it's very different, and they're completely different books. But Benjamin Franklin is tied into Cotton Mather, and he's doing these human experiments, it appears. We can't prove that that's what the bodies in his basement were for, but we also have evidence that Cotton Mather was doing human experiments, and we have all of these people tied to the Royal Society, and of course the Royal Society ties into all of this stuff regarding modern MK Ultra and things like that. Today we've got Rupert Sheldrake today as a member of the Royal Society, but Kurt Gödel. There's plenty of people that are and were, and that's not even mapping them out. Alfred Russel Wallace, another one. But so when you go through and you realize, here's a good one, Sir James George Fraser, that's another one you don't expect. These are people that make up all of the fake archaeology and fake religions and fake history that they feed us to cover up Tartary and all of this stuff. But so these guys are Royal Society, and they're working to cover this whole thing up as a whole, and they create this Salem Witch Trial thing, basically is like a cover story. But what we also found was that they were creating, and why don't you go into this, Holly? They were actually creating and promoting the whole story of witchcraft behind the scenes with the Royal Society, and then they would cite their own stuff that they were citing there.
So I've been trying to follow up on the history of witchcraft and the use of spectral evidence. So starting with Cotton Mather, promoting that within the Puritan court system. And as we had mentioned in the last video, it's basically the idea that someone can be like psychically harassed by another person. And this was used in the Puritan courts to convict people. And as I don't think we mentioned in the last episode that the people who admitted that they were witches were allowed to live. Meanwhile, the people who denied it and said that they were innocent were the ones who were killed.
Right. Now, and that's a really interesting point. I'm glad you brought that up, because everybody says that the witches were killed, and the Satanists and the Wicca people, they love to play this up. However, they were not the ones killed. It's very clear from the historical record that the ones that were put to death were the ones that were denied being witches, and all of those who admitted to being witches walked free. So, great point.
I've discovered that, the real witches, the real Satanists in this whole thing are the members of the Royal Society, the people who are, they're also connected very closely to Freemasonry. Of course, we know Ben Franklin himself was a Mason. I've been doing a lot of reading. There's a book I have, Freemasonry and the Birth of Modern Science. So after the Puritanism started to fall apart, the Puritan colonies, Enlightenment was promoted by individuals such as Ben Franklin, a Freemason, and the idea of the Enlightenment, if you think about the false light, or if you're thinking about Lucifer, so they were promoting this idea beyond the traditional Christianity to promote scientism. And once you start to see that, you see the big picture and how this has been going on for centuries. So I thought it would be easy to start researching witchcraft and the witch hunts, but the primary documents are actually very hard to find. You see people constantly cross-referencing each other. And
there's a cell.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of them are members of the Royal Society. They're the ones who are writing and reporting on this history. So what little information we can find, sometimes we've had to transcribe, or we find just bits and pieces of it. And the witch trials seem like a witchcraft started there's two individuals called Matthew Hawkins and John Stern, and they wrote The Discovery of Witches and Witchcraft. And that's where the idea of we use torture techniques. So as we've seen, and how I was able to connect it to your MK Ultra research, so keeping people awake for days at a time, keeping them in very uncomfortable positions, tied up, making them run around for an entire day until they collapse. And of course, the drowning techniques, where if someone drowned, then they were innocent. And if they float and they were kept alive, then they were a witch and could be condemned. So I've been able to follow up on some of that.
All right. So, and then let's get back to Ben Franklin for a minute. So Ben Franklin was a member of, let's get over to Cotton Mather. So Cotton Mather, of course, connects over to Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's brother was James Franklin. James Franklin worked with, what was his name? Dr. William Douglas. This guy here, Dr. William Douglas owned and founded the New England Courant, newspaper that Benjamin Franklin's brother, James Franklin, ran. Now, it should be pointed out that Benjamin Franklin, just as Cotton Mather was a pamphleteer, which is a early type of propagandist, and they're working for Harvard. And they're around the Harvard area. They're doing the same type of propaganda. We see them, promoting these things. So behind the scenes, Benjamin Franklin and James Franklin and William Douglas are working on, let's say it's Team B. And then on the other team, you go up and you connect to these guys, and you can see, oh, William Douglas, he's a member of the Royal Society. And you go over here to Ben Franklin, and you go, oh, he's a member of the Royal Society. And then, so we're reading through these pro and counter attacks, and they're all being controlled. Each side of the dialectic is being controlled by members of the Royal Society. So, so let's see. William Douglas is one side. We have Joseph Glanville, who's in there, and he's creating the witchcraft story that's going on there, and he's influencing Cotton Mather, and Cotton Mather's selling the witchcraft story in Salem and using this whole thing, and then we've got Robert Hooke over here, and he's, selling scientism and got to listen to us and what we've got, and he helps create the peer review system that they use for mind control. He creates we suspect that it was him in his book, Micrographia, where they were actually studying how to use the flea to commit genocide. Because when you think about how, I'm going to segue for a second, when you think about how you would get, mass murder across enemy lines, there's a couple ways you could do it. One, you could, and it's not an either or thing necessarily. It could be an also and, but you might drop ergot in a well, for instance, or you breed a bunch of fleas and contaminate them with contaminated rats, and then you send somebody with these fleas behind enemy lines, and you let them loose somewhere, and they spread, and you have, let them loose in different areas. So this is what we suspect is going on, and we're doing some additional research to compare different angles in how they were, most likely committing these genocides. Now, what was interesting to discover was that it wasn't just against the Native Americans, it was against the English. And of course, everybody knows that they genocided the Irish. And then the Black Plague of Europe, so 70 million people in Europe were genocided. And then you have, and that's what they admit to. And so, and then you have this, it's well known that Tartary was genocided and Genghis Khan's people were genocided. So we have all of these genocides going on, and then we have these people all centered and associated around the Royal Society. And not only that, but when you see the Spanish conquistadors going into, say, Aztec or Mexica territory in Mexico, etc., and these smallpox outbreaks happen, these actually look intentional all throughout, and it looks like the same group of people. And thanks to Derek and Matthew for the donations just now. I really appreciate that.
So you mentioned Robert Hooke, and he was one of the founders of the Royal Society. He was one of the first people to write about in the Philosophical Transactions, the journal of the Royal Society, using the new technology of the microscope. So he published a book called Micrographia, and it was during the same time as the Great Plague in London that he published Micrographia, which featured a very large drawing. He had observed the very plague flea, the exact flea, which carried the bubonic plague. And when I've read about this Micrographia book, it's always, oh, isn't it a coincidence that he is studying and examining the flea, the very plague flea, as this is breaking out? And then after the fire the next year in 1666, Robert Hooke is put in charge of rebuilding London. So him, along with the Royal Society members, the plague spreads. Anyone who could afford to, as we all know, while these plagues were happening, people would go over to Europe, people would go over to the United States. They could escape for a while and then come back.
What we need to be clear, too, is that these atrocities were blamed on the Christians as well, when it was solely done by the Puritans and members of the Royal Society, and it appears from the initial research, Harvard College as well.
That's correct. So as we've been able to connect, it seems like all of these disease, I mean, I know it sounds kind of crazy, but once you start to look at when these plagues were around and wiping out people, it always seems that the Royal Society is able to step in and rebuild or take over the area, the same groups of people, and to promote, scientism is what they ended up promoting in the Enlightenment era after all is said and done.
Indeed. Thank you, Derek, for the donation just now. So now let's get into another angle that we've discovered now. There's a number of things that we consider that are probably limited hangouts, like we discussed last time. And, it's like people that attacked us, they accused us of supporting the ergot theory when we debunked the ergot theory. At least, figure out what the hell theory we're discussing before you, attack us for it and claim we're promoting the exact opposite theory that we are. But so it appears that the ergot theory is a limited hangout, and but interestingly, the Royal Society was also studying ergot as part of these plagues, and they could have, they were looking at how to wipe out the immune system using different types of molds, using different, types of diseases, using sugar and alcohol and these types of things. Anything that could suppress the immune system, and then they could get in and wipe out lots of people with this stuff. So, anyway, you have something to add to that?
So I think when we started to research the different techniques, so when we talk about the Salem Witch Trials, obviously these girls who were suffering from afflictions, something was going on, whether the traditional, since the 1970s, it's been promoted. There's a book that I have called Poisons of the Past. And this is one of the books from the era that said, well, the girls could have been poisoned with ergot, which is a mold from rye. A lot of people probably know about this. Yep, rye.
And the issue with that story, though, is everybody at the time knew what ergot was. So, why wouldn't they have figured that out?
So, and also it's definitely it's not very controllable. Once you're sick with it, as Jan, people can die. It's hard to dose, and the girl's symptoms would come and go. So, it could be a mix of psychological torture. These girls were taken into the care of Cotton Mather, who was very familiar and wrote about torture techniques, wrote about poison. He also mentioned something called datura or Jimson weed. That was another possible limited hangout. We found some evidence that the Royal Society members were writing about the use of Jimson weed or datura, which people might know is a type of deadly nightshade, and it grows all around the United States. It was well known. It was very common in Massachusetts. It's actually brought over from Asia. So for some reason, these early colonists brought over Jimson weed with them.
This poison, right, which is, and you start seeing this stuff, but they try to spin it and blame it on the Native Americans, and then you look at, and I posted last week, this guy should only be whispered of in condemnation, when you Benjamin Franklin here, but so why, they're trying to claim that it was the Native Americans and Native American witchcraft and this sort of stuff, so they bring it over. They plant the stuff. They even talk about it, how much of it is planted in each acre of their cornfields, etc. And so we can see that, that they're using it for something, but we see it being used. What was it was used for warfare. What was the earliest instance you found?
So it was actually used, believe it or not. So during there was a fight with Cromwell, and Cromwell's troops were coming over to Jamestown, and they were trying to fight. There had been an uprising over in the Jamestown colony. So what happened was the rebels were dosed with Jimson weed in their food, and it was discussed that they basically went crazy for 11 days. They were very ill. And that's how they were able to use chemical warfare using Jimson weed. And basically, if people know about datura or Jimson weed poisoning, like, you can become a zombie. So, and it can be
that's the infamous scopolamine that people hear about. That these so-called shamans slip into their ayahuasca brews and do these rape scenes and things like that with the New Age CIA so-called spiritual scene.
So I'm not exactly positive if that's, the girls could have been poisoned with that. There seems to be a lot of overlapping symptoms to that, it being commonly available. And with the fact that we found that Cotton Mather himself reports on Jimson weed, talks about its symptoms, talks about its use as a chemical weapon. There's definitely some very interesting evidence. We don't have a smoking gun, but it was commonly used as chemical warfare in the American colonies.
Let's see. Mark is asking if we have sources that we can link. We're not providing them in the show right now because we're busy actually doing the show, but we will be, as we discussed at the beginning, we'll be publishing a book on this, and very possibly a shorter article. It started out as an article, and now it's just we have an overwhelming amount of research to catalog that we need to lay out.
Yeah, but if you start to look up the work of Cotton Mather, he talks about some of his work. I believe it's called The Christian Philosopher. If you can find a PDF of it, he talks about Jimson weed.
I had it up earlier. What the heck did I do with it? I could have just shown that on screen. Here we go. I've got it right here. So this is one of the citations. This is The Christian Philosopher, Cotton Mather. Let's see here. Hold on, just trying to bring it up. The pages are loading here. It's going slowly. Yeah, you can tell this is a freaking old book. It's in Old English, so you got to get used to the SF changes and things like that. But if you spend a few minutes with it, it's not hard to read. Best Discoveries in Nature with Religious Improvements, Fellow of the Royal Society. But there's a whole section in this book that Mather, what is it, page 138, I believe, where Mather discusses... Here, let me just pull it up here, where he discusses datura, and he discusses Mandrake as well. Boy, it's taking its time loading here. It's just going around. So I'll show that as soon as it comes up here, if it does. Anyway.
So some other books that people could read. I've got. It seemed like there's George Lyman Kittredge. I think he's a limited hangout, but there's some lost works of Cotton Mather. Some of this you can find PDF online, and also another book I recommend about Mather is The Angel of Bethesda. That's his medical writings. So he talks about the use of blights upon wheat and rye in the area, and also talks about how to treat people. And he was never an actual medical professional, but during that time at Harvard, if you could study the books, you could basically experiment on people, and that's what he did when he launched the first inoculation campaign in North America.
And thank you, Ernesto, for the $25 donation. I really appreciate that. Now, I'm going to show this. This did finally load. It only took like a minute to load up here. So, again, this is Cotton Mather, page 138, The Christian Philosopher. We can see down here, in Virginia, there is a plant called Jamestown weed. That's what Jimson weed is named after. Whereof, some having eaten plentifully, turned fools upon it for several days. One would blow up a feather in the air, another dart straws at it, a third fit stark naked like a monkey, grinning at the rest, a fourth fondly kiss and pause his companions and sneer at the faces in his frantic state. Sorry, some of the SF change and some of these letters are hard to read quickly here. State that they were I guess that's confined, lest they should kill themselves. So there appeared nothing but innocence in all of their actions. After 11 days, they returned to themselves, not remembering anything that had passed. My friend, a madness more senseless than that which was vegetable and venoms, the eaters of it, holds thee in the stupefying chains thereof, if thou dost not behold in the whole vegetable kingdom such works of the glorious Creator as call for the continual admiration. It is a notable stroke of divinity, methinks, which Pliny falls upon Flora's odoresque in diem. Oh boy, and I have that translated in the other thing here.
I think that's pretty good. I mean, I think when research...
people can get the gist of it. Well, let me just say here that he actually goes on to say that they are promoting this stuff to children as the forbidden fruit, and that is in all of these quotes here. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that those at the Harvard Social Relations Department et al. In the 60s and 70s and thereafter under Henry A. Murray and all of those, and Tim Leary, who clearly went in and copied a lot of Cotton Mather's stuff. I suspect that they went into Cotton Mather's book there and just read that little thing and went, we could sell drugs as the fruit of the tree to the kids. And it's just right there in that citation.
So with Datura, I mean, I'm not positive. I think it's Datura is more likely than ergotism, though, just with the symptoms that the girls exhibited. So brazenness, forgetfulness, distraction, hallucinations, suggestibility, and also memory loss. Like the girls claim that they didn't know what was going on. So, it could have been torture as well under the hand of Mather, but it could have also been some sort of strange dosing.
Well, and it could have very well been, sickness inoculations that they're doing. It could have very well been just a simple combination of all of this stuff. I mean, we see them creating mass hysteria. We see Franklin hanging out with Mathers. We see Mathers doing, human experiments on children. We see 15 bodies in Franklin's house discovered, just 20 years ago, 300 years after the fact. So, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think people can start to look into the Hellfire Club and Franklin's connection to that group, and basically the abuse and torture that went on in those groups. Like, there's so many different societies and groups that we're talking about here, but as the audience knows, it's all a big club, and sometimes they act like they're opposing each other. So in the case of Mather and Franklin, they act like they're opposing each other at one point, but then you find out that they're all in the same club together. They're all in the Royal Society together. They're Freemasons, or they're a certain religion, or that's how they're able to play both sides and basically create this idea that inoculation and disease and the Enlightenment era, all of this starts to tie in together into this larger picture. And the Salem Witch Trials appears to be some sort of psychological operation that was used upon the early Americans.
Well, more so than that, a key thing, and we're just about to wrap it up here, but a key thing that we discovered was that the Salem Witch Trials were literally used to kick off the Enlightenment, which was then used to kick off the United States under the terms of separation of church and state. And then they would point at the Salem Witch Trials that they manufactured and PR'd the whole thing as the reason to do so, which they still do it today. And in fact, we had found you had found a news article a week ago. This guy who was a major who had published an article. What was his name? Major something or other. What was that guy?
You're putting me on the spot here. It's in Truth Dig magazine. You can see they published an article about Puritanism, basically defending the early Puritans, and it got quite a few views. And he was like, "Oh, there's a conflicting history of Puritanism in the United States." And I saw it on Facebook, and it was kind of fascinating to see people post in the comments saying, actually, thanks to the Puritans, we had the witch hunts in Europe and in the United States, and the massacre of the Native American people. Like, I think people are starting to wake up.
Well, what people need to realize is that the Puritans were not Christians. They were Jewish, and they had, the Christians have been blamed for this for over 300 years. And they're blamed for the Native American massacres. They're blamed for the Inquisitions in Europe. And when you realize the collapse of Tartary, the inversion of all of this stuff, you begin to realize that the Christians were falsely accused in most, if not all, of this stuff. But we see the same thing, and we've been discovering new evidence with even the conquistadors recently. That's a whole other topic that we'll have to get into at another time. But it's really really looking like the Royal Society, Harvard College, and the Puritans were behind the genocide of the Native Americans, behind the Great Plague and Fire of England, behind the Black Plague and mass genocide of Europeans, white Europeans across Europe, 70 million Europeans. So, these people that go around screaming that it's the white people doing this, you need to, wake up and pull your head out, and realize that it's not, white people doing this, that were targeted as well, that it's a very specific group of people doing this kind of stuff. And, we have to, and thanks Budcat for the donation there. And we have to, think properly and not just regurgitate things because, we've heard it repeated ad infinitum since we were, 2. Every time witchcraft and all this stuff is brought, the same stuff is just regurgitated over and over.
I've found a lot of evidence that the Jesuits were doing the same exact thing in Canada and in South America. And let's not forget, we celebrate Thanksgiving, which is basically
Kippur. That's
right.
Yom Kippur, yeah.
Yep, it's basically the new, so we're openly celebrating the genocide of the Native people and the new covenant with the Mayflower and the Puritans, and we've completely whitewashed over this terrible point in American history.
Let me just read a quote here, Holly. Now, this is a quote that we found, that I found on the Judaism online website, Simple to Remember. And many of the earliest pilgrims who settled in New England of America in early 17th century were Puritan refugees escaping religious persecutions in Europe. Now, what we have to realize is that, it was about the left-hand path and some of the stuff that they were doing. It wasn't that they were just, poor, innocent victims getting kicked out of every country in Europe. I mean, most people are smart enough to realize that, the good people don't get kicked out of the party every Saturday night. It's the bad people that are misbehaving that get kicked out of any place. When you're out at dinner someplace, is it the people spazzing out and causing a scene that get kicked out, or the people that are minding their business that get kicked out? You got to use an iota of common sense. But so the majority of the earliest settlers were, of course, Puritans, beginning with the Mayflower over the next 20 years, 16,000. And, many of these reports vary in how many Puritans migrated to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Many more settled in Connecticut and Rhode Island. Like their cousins back in England, these American Puritans strongly identified with the historical traditions and customs of the ancient Hebrews of the Old Testament. The ancient Hebrews of the Old Testament. They viewed their immigration from England as a virtual reenactment of the Jewish exodus from Egypt. And again, the Purim, so-called, escape from Haman, or the massacre of 75,000 Persians that they celebrate every year. To them, England was Egypt, the king was Pharaoh, the Atlantic was the Red Sea, America was the land of Israel. The Indians were the ancient Canaanites. They were the new Israelites, entering into a new covenant, that's the Mayflower Compact, with God in a new promised land. Thanksgiving, first celebrated in 1621, a year after the Mayflower landed, initially conceived as a day parallel to the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. It was to be a day of fasting, introspection, and prayer. So, all of this stuff was spun, and then the Christians were blamed for all of these actions for 300 years. They literally cast a spell. The Puritans, the Harvard college faculty, and the Royal Society literally cast a spell against the Christians that has lasted for all of this time. So, nobody's actually, the research out there, the pathetic trolls out there doing their lame hit pieces and, talking about our websites and saying I'm Jewish when I'm Danish and Welsh because they can't look up an Anglo-Saxon name that means, whatever. But, it's just, ridiculous. And thanks again for all of you guys who exposed yourselves over the last few weeks and let us know that we were on the right path and, helping us out with all of this.
Yeah, so someone just posted that the spell is broken. So I think just understanding as we start to look at events such as the Salem Witch Trials, that this was a big psychological operation upon the colonists and murdered a lot of people. The Pequot War, if you look that up, the genocide, that was a big psychological operation to wipe out, to genocide an entire race of people. And my call to the audience is to look at other events in history with a critical eye and notice that it always seems to be like certain groups of people, the Royal Society, different groups working together, sometimes opposing each other, but creating this history, if you will, and then rewriting history.
And blaming the victims the whole time for 300 years, and then getting everybody in that time to just thoughtlessly repeat the story. So, we're going to pretty much wrap it up here. Thanks, everybody, for the support and donations. Please support. We can use all the support we can get. We've been spending everything you're donating on books and research for this, and this has turned into a rather large project. Holly and I just wanted to write a paper, and it was like, okay, we're at 25 pages, and it was just all of this research kept pouring in, and now it's at 80 pages, and we're only like maybe a third or a halfway done with the project. So we're just going to turn it into a book project. Hopefully we'll be able to whittle an article out of it to post for everybody. We'll figure out how to do that. Again, please support. Don't forget to go to Holly's channel and support her too. She's been doing a lot of hard work. Really appreciate all of the hard work. So thanks, everyone. Holly, did you have anything you wanted to add?
If you want to subscribe to my channel, that'd be great. And I put out videos every day, and I've been working hard, reading a lot of books, and the project's a lot bigger than I ever thought it would be. So
please subscribe and hit the little bell thing down there as well so it notifies you when we post a show. So thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm sure we'll do another update on this project. It's just so vast and there's so much good material to discuss. So anyway, thanks everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.